So my talk will be a little different from the sessions that we have been having yesterday. First, I'll be taking you to the global south, and I think I'm the only one speaking from a post-colonial perspective. So we are going to take a little detour there. And secondly, I specialize in the field of literature, language, and culture studies and communication. So I'll be talking about the rhetorical execution of the idea of energy rather than the history of ideas. So I'm going to take you away from continental philosophy that we had been talking about all day yesterday to a case study-based analysis contextualized in India. And since I'll be making several local and contextual references with respect to India, you are free to ask me for more details during the Q&A session. So here I begin. So with the growing concern for an increasingly heating planet and its own climate change vulnerability, India over the last couple of decades has proclaimed a steady commitment to the shift to renewable energy. While weaning away from fossil fuels seems daunting when faced with the challenge of providing sufficient clean energy for its massive population, India faces a predicament of climate issues in being co-opted by a right-wing populist narrative in the public discourse. The emergence of the right-wing Hindu Nationalist Party, BJP, that is the abbreviation for Bharatiya Janata Party, as a prominent force in India's political scenario has affected a polycrisis of extremistic policies and exclusionary climate communication, including environmental discourses of energy renewability. Touted as the Vishwa Guru or the world leader playing a pioneering role in climate action in South Asia, the rhetoric of PM Modi's climate vision involves a definite attempt at re-sacralization of nature as an extension of the larger Hindutva vision of a reclaimed nation. In today's paper, I'll be focusing specifically on the rhetoric of solar energy initiatives and the co-option of solar energy as an essentially Hindutva symbol of potent resurgence. Thus, contrary to the assumed correlation between fossil energies and right-wing politics, I claim that the Indian discourse of solar energy is steeped in rabid Hindutva that rests on a nativistic narrative of reviving a purist Hindu culture at the exclusion of the other larger group of minorities, that is the Muslims. Analyzing the rhetoric of solar energy initiatives in government documents and speeches, as well as visual texts in the context of Modera, the first solar power village in India, I seek to explore how the renewability narrative is being co-opted by the metaphor of environmental sacredness that obscures extractivism and is essentially polarizing as a public discourse. Subsequently, in contrast to the popular environmental ethos of re-sacralization that is often associated with post-colonial environmental discourses, I argue for an alternative discourse, maybe for a strategic technologism to address climate governance in a multi-faith, multicultural, heterogeneous country like India. So yesterday we had a couple of panels speaking about the connection between the sacred connection of nature and humans and how we can understand the soul, and Aksana's paper also spoke about that. So I begin with a discussion of the idea of re-sacralization of nature. And this is credited by Tariq M. Kadir as an environmental ethics proposed by Nasser in his famous book, Man and Nature in 1951. The idea of re-sacralization is an essential counter-narrative at once to the Judeo-Christian anthropocentrism as well as the desacralization or demystification of nature by the colonial onslaught of Western empiricism. As Nasser asserts, the ecological crisis is only an externalization of an inner malaise and cannot be solved without a spiritual rebirth of Western man. He is talking specifically in the context of the Western man, but then it can be extended to other cultures. It is still our hope that as the crisis created by man's forgetfulness of who he really is grows, and that as the idols of his own making crumble one by one before his eyes, he will begin a true reform of himself, which always means a spiritual rebirth, and through this rebirth, attain a new harmony with the world of nature around him. Otherwise, it is hopeless to expect to live in harmony with the grand theophany, which is virgin nature, which remaining oblivious and indifferent to the source of that theophany, both beyond nature and at the center of man's being. So Nasser locates it as a spiritual tour de force, which explores the relationship between man and nature, as found in Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, and particularly the Sufi dimension of Islam. For Nasser, the rift between man and nature is prompted by the dominance of modern secular science, locating the crisis more in the irresistible dominance of secular epistemology over theological and religious enchantment in the history of Western modernity. Since non-Western ancient cultures have traditionally embraced animism and environmental sacredness before colonialism disseminated the Western ethos, re-sacralization of nature constitutes a potent anti-colonial rhetoric of environmental reconstitution in several cultures. Several contemporary environmentalists echo Nasser's call for deification of nature, as Karen Armstrong in her book Sacred Nature argues that if we want to avert environmental catastrophe, it is not enough to change our behavior. We need to learn to think and feel differently about the natural world, that is to rekindle our spiritual bond with nature. Now, like several non-Western cultures, Indian environmental ethos is traditionally hinged on a non-anthropocentric deification of the natural world, visible in numerous instances of sacred forests and hybrid forms of non-human deities, the mythologies of landscapes and rivers, tales of transmorphing, ecozones of religious significance. Here I have put together some images that are part of the Indian cultural practices. So these are the sacred groves that are found in the southern part of India, the bioregions that are not to be disturbed by human settlement. These are some deities that we have, the hybrid forms of the animals and the human forms. This is again worshipping a medicinal plant, the tulsi, the worshipping of the Gaumata or the cow, the worshipping of the sacred rivers. So rivers there are associated with the idea of the sacred. And more often than not, the sacralization of nature is essentially linked to the pagan religion of Hinduism, as environmental historian Nandita Krishna asserts. And she says, Hinduism and nature delves into the religion's deep respect for all life forms, the forests, the trees, the rivers and the lakes, animals and mountains, which are all manifestations of the divinity. Nature is venerated all over India. Every village has a sacred grove, every temple a sacred garden, and a sacred tree. Krishna's books, Hinduism and Nature, Sacred Plants in India and Sacred Animals in India, assert the environmental sacred as an essential aspect of the traditional Indian ethos. It is noteworthy that though Krishna locates the sacralization of nature in essentially the Hindu culture, she emphasizes the plurality of Hinduism and points out the syncretism in the local lived culture. And a very wonderful example of such syncretic environmental sacredness is in the figures of Satyapir and Bon Bibi that the deltaic regions of India and Bangladesh worship, where these are Hindu deities with Islamic connotations, worshipped as the protector goddess and gods and goddesses, by both Hindus and Muslims against the tiger assaults of the Sundarbans. Such notions of the environmental sacred are alarmingly distorted when co-opted by the rhetoric of the right-wing religious populism in India. Over the last decades, India has seen a steady rise in right-wing populism that culminated in the massive electoral victory of the Nationalist Party BJP in 2004. Led by the hyper-visibilized leader Narendra Modi, BJP presents the vision of a new India, renamed as Bharat, that hinges on the establishment of an essentially Hindu nation but at the exclusion of other ethnic and religious identities, especially the Muslims. While there is a larger political reluctance to engage with environmental issues as central electoral themes, right-wing agendas, economic, political, and religious, have threatened the fight against climate change, and there is no political space for critical NGOs and civil society organizations. The sacralization of nature as a mode of reviving the ancient Hindu past aligns with BJP's political narrative of crystallizing a post-secular, crystallized Hindu nationalist future. One must, however, make a clear distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva. While Hinduism is a religion, Hindu nationalism or Hindutva is a political ideology whose relation to the religion of Hinduism could be considered analogous to the relationship between Christianity and Christian fundamentalism or Islam and Islamic fundamentalism. Hindutva is based on the concept of an extreme form of homogeny and hinges on the idea of an Indianness based on the ethnic exclusion of the others, primarily the Muslims. Important ideological tenets of Hindutva include a radical rejection of India's secular and pluralistic constituency, instead restoring an essentially purified Hindu past of Vedic supremacy, a promised land or Punya Bhumi or the Holy Land that has been defiled by several invaders. The ideological tendencies of Hindutva define the legislative and administrative actions of the government, which has enrolled itself in several controversial moves of selective citizen registry through NRC and CA. I can speak more about these moves by the government in the discussion. The selective persecution of Muslims through colonial era acts of sedition and a renaming of spaces to resonate a Hindu territoriality. Interestingly enough, renewable energy and climate change rhetoric, considered to be essentially radical and non-conservative in the Euro-American circles, has been co-opted by the Hindutva rhetoric as a way forward in the direction of reviving the ancient glory of the Hindu nature of Prakriti. So the book by Mukul Sharma, titled as Green and Saffron, the RSS Modi and the Indian Environmental Politics, attempts an extensive study of Hindutva's investment in climate change and renewable energy, studying how Modi's image was branded as, to quote, the solar superman and a pioneering advocate of renewability from the international condemnation he received as the Chief Minister of Gujarat during the 2002 Godhra riots or pogrom against the Muslims. So several countries had banned Modi's entry during the riots, but there has been a complete rebranding of his image in the international circles. While Sharma looks at the modes of branding whereby Modi gains political legitimacy through climate change and renewable energy, whereby, to quote him, he attempted to cultivate climate change and renewable energy as crucial components to build consent, confirmation, and consensus among influential stakeholders, such as elite groups, media, civil society, and the international community, close quote. My focus is mostly on the rhetoric of solar energy and the way climate communication in India is strategically veered towards establishing an exclusionary society based on the visions of the Hindutva politics. The rhetoric of inexhaustibility of the other elements of nature, water, sun, wind, waiting to be harnessed endlessly, fits seamlessly into the narrative of the powers of the elemental Hindu gods. There are several questions we need to ask. How do some key cultural and political ideas of nature and nation, such as a natural, powerful, pollution-free country, feature in such politics? How does the conception of Bharat as an ancient glorious leader, Jagat Guru, play at the international level? And how can climate change be utilized to build the popularity and legitimacy of an authoritarian government and leader? Let me cite two specific instances of such appropriation of the solar energy narratives as seen in several speeches and government documents. So my first example is from the co-option or the appropriation of the symbol of the sun in BJP's electoral politics. So since 2014, the time when BJP comes to power, Modi has consistently linked the revered color of the Hindus and the BJP to his energy politics. And in several of his speeches, he says, the time has come for a saffron revolution. The saffron is the color of solar energy. Within the domain of climate change and renewable energy, BJP draws upon references from ancient mythology and science and employs them politically to support their concept of a Hindu Rashtra. The RSS climate change narrative prominently features the sun and its association with Hinduism, also reflecting the influence of Hindu national culture, Hindu ecology, and the history of the power that spans centuries. This narrative suggests that the idea of harnessing solar energy is deeply ingrained in Hindu Indian civilization. The sun is symbolically manifested not only in the form of energy, but also in the form of a lifestyle, as in the yoga pose of Surya Namaskar or the sun salutation. Sharma thus observes that the supremacy, unity, and purity of Hindu life and thoughts run throughout the Hindu rights conception of climate crisis, which they believe should be addressed by restoring ancient Hindu philosophy, rituals, and social order. Over time, this notion comes to be linked with Modi and subsequently evolves into a reverence for a pre-Islamic, pre-colonial, purist Hindu culture, which is on the path of restoration in the hands of the solar superman, that is Modi. So in one of his speeches, Modi says that since ancient times, different civilizations have given a special place to sun, and in Indian traditions, sun is the source of all forms of energy. As the Rig Veda says, sun god is the soul of all beings, moving and non-moving. Many in India begin their day with a prayer to the sun. Today, when the energy sources and excesses of our industrial age have put our planet in peril, the world must turn to sun to power our future. For Modi, the sun is not just rejuvenating, but also a totem of an ancient Hindu culture that needs to be revived from the perils of Islamization and Western secularism. The symbolic narrative of the sun is evident in two recent anti-Islamic sites of contention. So in 2021, Modi inaugurates the first solar village in Gujarat's Modhera. There's a small village in Gujarat. And there, addressing a rally, the Prime Minister says, and I quote, "Today a new energy development has been infused for Modhera, Mahesana, and the whole of North Gujarat. From electricity, water to road and rail, many projects related to dairy, skill development, and healthcare have been inaugurated and foundation stones have been laid today." Close quote. The site for development is strategically chosen in Modhera. Modhera holds a very important religious significance. This is the site of a famous sun temple where the Surya Gram, or the first village in India to be powered entirely by the solar energy, is set up. Invoking the power of the sun god, Modi lauds Modhera as a holy destination of light, which will be illuminated by the sun in the morning and by solar energy at night. The strategic location of the solar plant in Modhera is a deliberate invocation of a conflictual history of Muslim invasions on Hindu India, in the same way that the Somnath temple has often repeatedly been cited as a testimony of Hindu persecution. So Modhera was a site of a temple, a solar temple, that was demolished by the violent Muslim aggressors, Mahmud Ghazni. And Modi chooses that site for the establishment of the solar village. So it is ironical that while the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, advised against participating in the inauguration of the Somnath temple, a couple of decades later, a site of a plundered temple becomes a potent addition to the Hindutva rhetoric of solarity. The inauguration of the solar temple village was attended by Modi. It becomes a part of his government program that was streamed on the official PM's channel. It showcased a tribute to the Indian classical forms, dance forms, a laser presentation with an emotional narration of how Hindu temples were ruthlessly plundered, an intense reverberation of Vedic chants, and a dramatic celebration of the restoration of the lost glory. While Modi mentions the technological details of the solar setup, his speech is an impassioned expression of a celebratory rhetoric of the triumph of the Hindu culture over the Islamic attempts at desecration. So he speaks at length about how this Islamic aggressor, invader Muhammad Ghazni, demolished the solar temple, but the sun temple continues to stand tall, and it has provided inspiration for generations of Indians, and now we have come back and revived the land from the hands of the aggressors. Note the rhetoric of contrast between transience and timelessness, aggression versus resilience, a bloodied past and a reclaimed future. The presentation on that date ends on a nationalistic note where the revival of the temple is blended with the celebration of Indianness as the laser projectors turn the temple into the tricolor of the Indian flag with the national anthem playing in the background. So the final presentation came up like this. The sun, the Hindu past, and the nation are all tied together in a common string of rejuvenation, the symbolic import of which exceeds the technological success of renewable energy installations. My second example is a more potent example, how the idea of the sun is co-opted in the Hindu narrative, and this is happening at the controversial site of Ayodhya. This is the immensely controversial site of Ayodhya. The Ram Mandir at Ayodhya has a skewed history of Hindu-Muslim conflict. So in 1992, a masjid which stood at this place was demolished on the pretext that this is actually the site for a Ram temple. This is the birthplace of Lord Rama. So they drew their references from the mythology of the epic Ramayana, and they claimed that the same land where the masjid was standing is actually the place where the Ram temple should have been there. And this has sparked a very long religious and communal conflict all over the nation. And for more than 2 decades, that demolished Babri Masjid has been a painful reminder of a deadly assault on the liberal, progressive, secular idea of India that forms the core values of the Indian constitution. The Hindu deity Ram became more than a character of an epic poem or a gentle household god for domestic worship, and became the hyper-masculine god embodying an aggressive Hindu nationalism. For a long time, this site was closed because court cases were going on, and eventually in 2023, the Supreme Court of India sanctions the construction of the Ram temple on the same spot, thus fueling a triumphant chest-thumping of the Hindutva brigade that culminated in the slogan, Mandir Wahi Banayenge, which means we will make the temple right there. At a ceremony to lay the temple's foundation stone in 2020, Modi said that Ram temple will be a modern signifier of our ancient culture. It will be an example of our patriotic fervor. And the PM, this is the Ram temple that is the newly constructed, and the PM presides over the inauguration of the temple. This has never happened before. We never had prime ministers carrying on with the rituals of inauguration in a temple. So the Ram Mandir not only saw an unprecedented conflation of religion in the state, but it also symbolized the triumph of the Hindutva ethos over the pluralistic tenor of the country. Such a major triumph needs to be validated by the divine elements, and this is where the co-option of the sun comes in. And it's quite fascinating how the sun is incorporated in the temple rituals in the presentation of the Surya Tilak, whereby the idol of Ram is greeted by the sun ray on its forehead. So it is a product of a classic engineering technique using mirrors and angles of reflection. The Surya Tilak moment has been an awe-inspiring effect, had an awe-inspiring effect on the devotees astounded by the miracle of the sun god blessing the idol. I have a video of that moment. I don't know how to play it. Can I? It's coming. Yeah, okay. Oh, the volume will not come. That's fine. You can see how the sun rays are redirected on the idol. This is the moment.
I thought maybe we should turn the light off.
Yeah, so they placed the periscopic mirrors and the angles, and so Modi celebrates this moment with an emotional tribute and conflating it with a resolution for a cleaner energy future. And he says this much awaited moment at the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi is a moment of bliss for everyone. Excuse me. This Surya Tilak will illuminate every resolution of developed India with its divine energy in the same way. May this Surya Tilak bring energy and solar energy into our lives, and may it inspire our nation to scale new heights of glory. So this is it. Yeah, we can stop it. Significant to note here is that the sun is further assimilated in the vision of Ayodhya, with the chief minister proposing to convert Ayodhya as a solar city. The use of the sun in Hindutva rhetoric is also significant when you take into account the contrasting astronomical bodies of the stars and the moon invoked as symbols of Islam. As natural objects are sorted in parochial compartments, the sun and its power cease to be apolitical. The alarming conflation of extremist Hindutva rhetoric with the discourse of renewability thus normalizes energy transition to strengthen an exclusionist Hindutva propaganda for a non-secular nation. Maybe the war against the Muslims will be fought on solar power channels. And in the face of such polycrisis, one wonders what could be a counter-narrative to the environmental Hindutva. I propose a rhetoric of strategic technologism, which would dissociate the sacred from the natural and communicate environmental crisis in a secular scientific rhetoric. I mean, of course, it's not foolproof, but at this point, I really don't know what else to propose that does not alienate the minorities. In a multi-ethnic, polytheistic country like India's re-sacralization of nature spells a ominous doom in the hands of the right-wing party. Moreover, assigning divinity to solar energy also absolves it from the manifold issues of disposition and maintenance solar parks entail. So there is this case of Charanka, where the construction of a vast solar park had led to the disposition of several nomadic tribes, and solar energy definitely needs to be critically assessed and not worshipped or ordained by the divine. So these are my proposals for de-rhetorising, but the alternatives, I'm not sure about them, what exactly we should be taking it forward. So is adopting a secular over the post-secular the solution, or should we look at technologism and just dismiss the divine and the sacred, or maybe a more pluralistic, inclusive counter-narrative of the divine probably will offer a solution. So it's open for discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. For me, it wasn't quite clear from your presentation. Are you critical or are you supportive of the idea of the special connection of the Hindu culture to nature? Because I recall this study of Arun Agrawal of the deforestation practices in this Kumaon region of the peasants, and I guess that's my question.
No, of course, I'm critical of the political appropriation of this connection by the far-right narrative.
No, I mean the idea itself, because it's really much present in the post-colonial discourse.
Yes, the idea itself is, I'm not critical of that, because I see that it is embedded in local cultures, because we have a very pluralistic, multicultural, multi-ethnic context in India. So when it is embedded in the local syncretic cultures, which doesn't go with the grand narrative of Hindutva, it works out, because the indigenous communities, the Adivasi communities, they have been living like that. I mean, their lifestyle supports that. But what we are talking about is a grand nationalistic narrative, where there is a co-option and there's no space for these pluralisms. That's why I showed that slide on a syncretic assumption of the Hindu deities with the Islamic conventions, which is specific to that bioregion of the Sundarbans. We don't find it anywhere else. So when you're talking about these local communities, these connections that are happening in specific contexts, I think it works out fine. It's only the grand narrative that I'm critical of, that has a political mileage or a political, end game to it.
I have a comment, maybe more than a question. I find it very striking that the government in India is appropriating or is taking over the anti-colonial discourse, and I would observe something similar to a certain extent in Russia, where you have also on the one hand a very strong discourse and strong policies on the family, on traditional values, and at the same time, especially with regard to Africa, the revitalization of anti-colonial discourses and saying we are proposing economic relations on equal terms. So this is something where I find where it's very hard to work with post-colonial theory, really. And it makes me really think how to, if it needs a new turn, so to say, in post-colonial theory maybe, or how it is appropriated, yeah, by certain authoritarian movements, regimes. I find that very striking in your presentation, and thank you for that. And maybe a question, because I tried to answer your question by a counter question that you were posing here. I think, well, is there a more inclusive, pluralistic counter-narrative? I think this is actually the key question in order to reduce the effects of the climate crisis, because I mean, of course, there will be technological achievements needed in order to prevent the most hazardous outcomes of climate change, but it really needs a democratic alternative. I think this is something that is usually left out when we are thinking about how to deal with the climate crisis, right? It is really an international crisis because it affects everyone on this planet, but it's also, it really raises the question of how to govern in a democratic and inclusive way. So I think this is really something that should be in the center of further research here, and I think, yeah, I would be very interested to hear how this is discussed in India. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I really enjoyed. That was an amazing talk. I'm sorry. I also have a question related to Russia. Dugin, the so-called ideologist of the Russian world, he calls Putin. He has this idea of Moon Putin and Sun Putin, and that the Sun Putin has won over the Moon Putin in the recent years. And and he also has a lot of reference to Hinduism. Like he says that we need to fight the Kali Yuga, and also he has the same publisher as, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher that, Sri Pharma Pravarta Acharya. Do you know the guy? Yeah, so my question related to that. So is there anything in this kind of sun ideology of Modi and the company that has kind of contradictory, that kind of contradicts the type of oil-based extractivism? So does this kind of so this solar ideology, does it combine with the all other different types of extractivism, like oil drilling and stuff like this, or does it kind of say, well, that's okay as well?
Yeah, going to your question is a very good question, and it's quite interesting to see that Modi is hand in gloves with the crony capitalists of who run these solar initiatives. So it's quite fascinating to see the Adani company, which is the largest company which is in charge of coal energy. They are the same ones who are in charge of the solar energy panels. So if you go to the website of Adani company, you will see that one of their tabs says coal energy and brilliant futures and wonderful days ahead, and the next tab speaks about green energy. So he is, in terms of action, in terms of climate action, in terms of the governance part of it, he is not really distinguishing, or the party is not really distinguishing between the two. For them, the focus is more on how do we avail more energy in whatever forms. And that has been, again, a bone of contention in the recent Russian war, where India imported oil in spite of international sanctions. And his, the foreign minister said that, well, we have to look after our people, and our people need oil, so we cannot go by the ideological sanctions that are imposed by the international community. So it's very problematic. I would not say he is the solar superman in any way. He's not really, fighting for renewable energy. He is using it as a narrative, and it is very corporatized in India when it comes to solar energy initiatives. So it is not an alternative to fossil fuel corporatization, not at all.
That what you answer is very interesting, because this not fighting for really the climate change and the renewal, but using it as a narrative for his own agenda, political agenda, which is the right wing, these nationalist, supremacist, actually probably quite racist, no? Against Muslims.
Yeah.
That is really the key issue, I think, on the whole thing, because it's obviously this populism that uses narratives to convince the population to go, but it's very dangerous.
It is.
And we've seen the danger, the most dangerous aspect, I think, in the similarities of Israel in this case, where it reached to a fully level of genocide. I mean, this is really, the kind of way that we want to avoid, and at the moment all these polycrises are kind of in the danger of going that way if we don't kind of take care of it. So I think this, how to spread a more inclusive pluralistic counter-narrative where we get rid of all this racism, of supremacism, of post-colonial, which is actually still colonial somehow. No, I mean, having these double standards. No? So, in one hand, pretending to be activists for the climate change and solar energy, at the same time using the capitalist energy companies and doing business with the importing oil. So, it doesn't match. So it's really that people need to wake up to these double standards and how the narratives are being used to very dangerous political agendas. And
an emotional appeal also, because the moment you bring in the sacred, there is an emotional appeal that is made.
Absolutely, so it's another manipulation.
Yes, so that is very dangerous and very problematic.
Maybe as a moderator, I will just briefly, I was also thinking on which side of these three we are, and I thought that there is a grain of truth in what is then transformed into an ideological narrative, because sun literally is the supreme God. It is the soul of everything, because it produces all life, but the way how it is treated is not divine enough. So it's like they make it an instrument of a certain political goals. Gods shouldn't be instruments. I'm sorry, I mean, it's a little bit provocative, but you know what I mean, maybe. Yeah, it's not respectful enough for the entity like this. So. Oh, okay, shortly, yeah.
Yeah, no, just because this is also something that I was thinking about and then decided not to say anything. But I remember the history of monotheism actually comes from this, from, Egyptian pharaoh at some point deciding that we have too many gods, basically. It makes the country impossible to rule. So we just need one, and it's obviously going to be the sun. This is one of the historical beginnings of monotheism. And I think it's similar to the Jewish tradition as well.